activities for children could take places. I will not go in details to explain the project, but just to show you this relation, حتى even in the intersection of the internal reception part of the boutique hotel, as could be configured as extension of the piazza from outside. Last project is the City of Conflict and Memory, and finally, after all our research, we convinced the municipality in somehow to adopt one of this and to work with the municipality of Beirut, and in this one of the 5 projects related to Karm el-Zaytoun area in Beirut city. This is the area and the So the critical situation of Karm el-Zaytoun urban degradation has forced many really residents to leave their home, almost like emptying almost like 80% of the district of its Armenian citizens. This kind of situation, which is due to many social, economic, and infrastructure factors, has turned most dated building into rental apartment for foreign workers as a source of income of the inhabitants. So the relationship between the history of the area, having been a refugee camp since Armenian refugee camp since 1923, and today's critical situation has created, especially among younger generation, a sense of rejection for the society. And this situation of suffering is reinforced by the appearance of abandoned buildings by the inhabitants and by the degradation of the infrastructure that require to be renovated by the municipality. In fact, the dialogue between the politicians, the citizens, takes place only during the period of parliamentary elections, since Karm el-Zaytoun is part of Ashrafi district. The district of Karm el-Zaytoun is one of the few neighborhoods that still conserve its morphology and autonomy within Ashrafi district. Urban heritage of interesting architectural aspect must be reactivated in order to preserve its historical value and an explanatory episode for the evolution of Beirut city. In fact, our pilot project for Karm el-Zaytoun is the result of an analysis related to the study of typology, morphological transformation that have provoked very particular urban element for the project's development. The complexity, but also the simplicity of these elements made us understand the intimate and close relationship between the daily life of the inhabitant and the original master plan of the neighborhood. Our research focused on the transformations that took place over time to understand the value of collective spaces and private ones for these particular communities. This repertoire of urban vocabulary, due to the movement of the inhabitant, was analyzed to better understand the relationship between urban places and architectural spaces. These limits of spaces question the relationship between the political space of the city and the private space of the citizen. The political space of the area is imposed on the infrastructure, entire services, and the clarity of the master plan, while the private spaces is readable through the abusive movement and changes that have completed the architectural aspect of the neighborhood. This element, called urban values, that have been acquired from the public spaces became the collective actions of the population. In this sense, the collective spaces for the inhabitant of Karm al-Zaytun are considered a legitimate act of the community that is configured with the extension of their home to the outside. That means the extension of the ground floor for the street, the social entertainment to the stair, the playground toward the urban value, the playground toward the urban void between the buildings, the parking to the remain urban regulations, the communication to the balcony, etc. This repertoire of urban elements that reflects the transformation and the movement of everyday life and the dialogue between things and people became the main reference for projects development. So our proposal for Karm al-Zaytun, questioning the function of the neighborhood with the respect to Ashrafiyya and Mudawwar. In this case, this Ashrafiyya and Mudawwar area, and the role it could play as a space of connections between the two parts of the city, from Ashrafiyya to reach Mar Mikhael area. So, in fact, the project provides at urban level a 2 kilometers pedestrian network that connects Lassin with Mudawwar Mar Mikhael area, while at architectural scale, the creation of multiple piazzas with more diverse functions to expose both the culture and local production of Armenian community. In fact, along this path, 3 piazzas are identified to expose the peculiarity of Karm al-Zaytun as part of the urban heritage of Ashrafi. These 3 places of communication and dialogue were generated by the network of existing stairs and the relationship between the residual spaces and the degraded area for the development of public activities and services for the inhabitant. So in this kind of drawing, we can see also how all this network of pedestrian network of stairs and typology that exist in Karm al-Zaytun area, where it generate the start to generate this 3 piazzas that we need to activate inside Karm al-Zaytun area as part of this general network between Shafiyeh and Mudawwar, passing by Karm al-Zaytun, creating a community hub and a market for local production for the community. And in this case, Karm al-Zaytun will become like an active zone that connects 2 parts of the city. And here we can see the Piazza 1. This Piazza 1 is dedicated to a temple of daily life. The Piazza 2, it is a piazza, a garden of peace. We call this like a garden of peace. And the third one, a piazza, a cultural piazza that is connected with an existing school and the church that exists in Karm al-Zaytun area. So in the first piazza, here we can see, include community hub, memorial garden, and the souk was designed as a reflection of the context with the purpose of bringing the community of Karm al-Zaytun together based on the collective historical memory, as well as the collective vision of their home area with the aim of activating and exposing local culture and production. And here we can of this images of the community hub that is connected directly to Zouk. And this is the area of Piazza A with the allocated that exists here, local and public production, and the community as became part of the public activities of the community of Karm el-Zaytoun, and the relation of this piazza with the highway that is overlap the situation of Karm el-Zaytoun. And this is one of the images of this very simple souk that we created as open spaces for the area. And here we can see there of interventions between green areas, market, and community hubs that we introduce in this area. And we can see also this relation of communication between the stairs, and that became part also of this open spaces in the community hubs that we create for Zaytoun for public activities. Another part of the Garden of Peace, where we create the entrance of the community hub from the other level, the modern. And this is the last one, is the piazza, cultural piazza that is connected to the existing school, expose their manual and local product. And this is the general view of Beirut. I take this picture, but I will talk about this. This is Beirut after August 4, and we are again general with the same situation that we start on 1992 to after our civil war to rethink about our city. And now we are working to produce a new manifesto regarding the post-reconstruction August 4 of Beirut city. Thank you so much. And
merci beaucoup, Maroun, pour cette présentation tout à fait admirable de votre travail sur Beyrouth. Je propose, nous sommes très en retard, donc je propose que nous rassemblions la discussion à la fin de la présentation des deux autres exposés, si ça ne vous dérange pas.
Non, pas du tout.
Merci infiniment. Donc, nous allons laisser la parole à donc c'est Majida Malo, non?
Oui, Majida Malo et Oussama.
Bonjour. Majida Malo et Oussama Abou. Majida Malo est architecte syrienne, diplômée de l'Université de Damas. Elle prépare un DSA architecture et projets urbains à l'ENSA de Paris-Belleville. Elle a collaboré en tant qu'assistante chercheuse à l'IW Lab, laboratoire de recherche de l'environnement du bâti en Syrie, sur un projet portant sur l'informalité pour la reconstruction, dont les résultats ont été présentés à la conférence Reconstruction of Neighborhood of War à l'Orient Institute of Beirut en 2018. Actuellement, elle est architecte aussi praticienne et elle travaille dans l'agence parisienne SO. Oussama Abou Samra est architecte d'origine syrienne. Elle est diplômée d'État donc à l'école de Paris-Belleville en 2017. Elle a obtenu un diplôme d'université. Diplôme d'université de modélisation numérique du bâtir sur le BIM à l'ENSA Paris-Est en 2018. Pardon, excusez-moi, j'ai compris, il faut un certain temps. Il est chargé de projets à l'agence d'architecture en FU, d'architecture et d'urbanisme. Il est actuellement inscrit en formation à HM ONP à l'Essai Val de Seine pour l'année 2020. Et je prie donc à Oussama de m'excuser pour cette...
Il n'y a aucun souci.
Merci. Je vous laisse la parole.
Je vais partager l'écran. Vous voyez l'écran?
Okay. We're happy to share with you today our case study on the city of Damascus in Syria. The study aims to better understand and read the spread of informalities in the city. If we take a look at these two pictures that share a similar view, from the first glance, we can see how Mountain Qasyun has been overcome with informal settlements. Today, the overwhelming majority of research papers that study informalities focus on these large informal tissues. And while this does cover an important form of informal construction, it limits the scope of research considerably, especially in a city like Damascus. We want to expand the scope of research when we look at Damascus to discuss the urban tissue in its totality, even inside the formal city. This will immediately show that informal acts are being practiced in different scales and different types, and that they affect the whole image of the city.
In order to present to you our work, we will first present a brief introduction of Damascus's expansion history and the elements that played a role in the emergence of informalities in its tissue. We will discuss how informalities were generated through time and how they became formalized in the process. And at last, we will conclude with a quick demonstration of the reality of urban planning in the city today. And in order to understand and read Damascus, we must be aware of its long history that spans over thousands of years. It went through several eras, each leaving their unique effect. So Damascus was densified through these different periods and became an urban patchwork as a result. The oldest and smallest part of the city developed since the Romans, passing through the Islamic and Ottoman eras. However, the 20th century has been particular due to the rapid expansion outside the walls. Most importantly, during the French Mandate in the first half of the century, Syria's independence during the second half, and the instability on a political, social, and economical level in parallel. But perhaps the most important factor that impacted the city is the huge rise in population number through the 20th century that also rose exponentially around the 1970s. And this can be traced to various reasons of immigration and a strong growth rate in the society. Michel Ecochard, that was mentioned before, proposed a master plan in 1968 that tried to address the city's population growth up until 1984, but even that plan couldn't anticipate the huge acceleration the city grew with. And as the population kept growing, formal construction was unable to adapt and catch up in time. And based on different data we collected, we used the graph illustrating the growth in population to illustrate the distribution of inhabitants between formal and informal housing. What is worth noting, first of all, in 1960, we have the first informal on Mountain Qasyun. The situation became extreme between 1981 and 1994 as 67% of the population lived in informal housing. This percentage started to decrease as formal housing tried to catch up, but it never went below 30%. And in 2010, before the war, 40% of the population lived in informal housing. The mainstream representation of these informalities are usually represented by the big settlements that form a belt around the city, but this only includes informal acts defined as settlements. And if we were to look at the city through the definition of an informal construction in the Syrian law, then most of the city would be filled with informalities of different scales and different types. And so we used the decrees issued by the Syrian government to categorize the different types of informal actions taken inside the city. So first of all, we have the change of function, for example, from residential to commercial or vice versa. Second, we have the increase or occupation of built area. And third, we have violations on granted permits, whether it be in the form of the construction, the material that's being used, or the construction technique. And in order to put this in perspective, to understand these different acts of appropriation, we looked at them also in the relation to the concepts of supply and demand over time. Because whenever formal supply isn't capable of responding to the increase in demand, informal supply steps in to fill the gap, creating a chain of supply, whether it be through the formal or informal constructions. And so,
based on this framework, we will look at different examples of informality, starting from the old Damascus city, where the need for commercial development started to appear for activities related to tourism. Most residences were being changed into hotels and restaurants, while the ancient fabric of the city was a pressing need for rehabilitation using traditional and appropriate methods. Some houses have been lucky to be treated with the right techniques of rehabilitation, like this picture of a Kuwaiti residence, where traditional materials and techniques are used. Considering that building crafts are becoming less and less practiced and hence more expensive. Unlike what's happening in this example, where many inhabitants who are not aware of the importance of the historic tissue start using random materials, modern materials, to grow organically, similar to how the city used to grow, depending on their current needs. In both pictures, we see concrete volumes being added, creating informal surface area, as well as using inappropriate building materials. To the left, we see an extreme case of a whole 3-floor building being constructed illegally inside the old city, hiding behind the excuse of using traditional finishes to cover the concrete structure. To the right, we see Al Qaybas district, East Saruja, outside the walls, which is as well filled with many similar cases of illegal upward extensions. Next, we will view the informal acts that happened on the modern tissue of Damascus that was built during the French Mandate, which was distinguished with its new type of housing villas. With time, this tissue required commercial development to accompany the rising interest of the residents around areas like El Malki that became a new second center of the city. We see on the left the most common modifications on residential buildings, which is the enclosure of balconies with transparent panels, as well as the addition of elevators, mostly on the exterior to facilitate access to all levels. On the right, a non-residential example, when an elevator was added on the exterior to only access the roof, which was illegally enclosed as a restaurant and completely separate from the building's main program, which is purely administrative. Most ground floor apartments and parking garages of these residential buildings were transformed into commercial shops. Balconies were enclosed and used as interior space, and most importantly, we noticed varying forms of floor extensions on the roofs with different materials. In some cases, we can note attempts to have a continuity in the facade between original and the extension, but the aesthetic value and quality of the building is almost always reduced. As these informal acts belong to different actors in different periods of time, they present very different visual identities, transforming the buildings into patchworks over time. Here's an example of a remarkable transformation of a residential building into commercial use. This building was one of the first 5 floors residential buildings built with concrete and remained one of the highest in Damascus for many decades. It was entirely renovated to become a 4 floors retail shop. All balconies related to the shop were enclosed. The entire layout was completely changed and demolished, and escalators were added in the inside of this building. Now we are going to view areas developed in the second half of the 20th century were built post-independence. Their proximity to the city center required them to adapt to the rising population needs and commercial development. Roof extensions were stacked on more than one level. In the right picture, for example, the apartments created on the roof benefit from big terraces and more possibilities to construct housing of a higher living standard than the formal apartments below. So the tendency to increase built-up area is evident in almost all residential units, and we can notice important services like pharmacies, for example, in the bottom left, constructed over a building garage space. So acts of informal appropriation in these zones were more aggressive in comparison to the previously mentioned areas. Even in the basements were appropriated with different residential and commercial use. Setbacks were ignored and constructed on. Therefore, most of the buildings of the 60s were badly treated over the years and exploited. Looking at these constructions, we can see that they behave in a similar way as the illegal settlements outside the city, except that these constructions occupy the city's urban silhouette.
And in the recent and modern era of the city's development is the time that needed to provide formal supply of housing for the huge population boom that we saw a few minutes ago. The informal supply of housing took the burden to house more than half the population in that time, but even then it remained underprepared. And so upward extension on formal residential buildings are more common, and some are completely detached from the building's visual identity, as we can see on the right, while on the left, the visual identity was tried to be imitated. So this photo shows the planned area and its intersection with the old fabric of traditional houses of Al Salhiyya, and the mosque to the left that is an important tourist attraction. The question here to ask is, where is the limit between the formal and the informal? Considering this complex tissue is of owned traditional settlements and then the informal settlements that expanded atop the Mount Qassim. It's worth noting that most of these old houses are awaiting to be demolished in order to be replaced with high residential buildings, which is taking years to be applied. Meanwhile, informal housing keeps expanding vertically by constructing multi-story buildings in some cases, where more extensions are always anticipated by the exposed structural elements. These schematic sections attempt to illustrate the previously demonstrated expansion of Damascus upon its different periods. The one common characteristic that we can see on the different tissues of Damascus, whether in the city itself or in the belt of informal settlements around it, is the constant need for growth through the different eras that it went through. At last, we want to talk about the government decrees that address these informal acts. These decrees are issued every few years and address informalities differently if they were constructed before or after the issue date. So precedent acts of the issue decree can be formalized if they prove their anteriority. Meanwhile, all illegal constructions done after the issue date of the decree, regardless of the type, location, and their investment or use, will be demolished. The last decree was issued in 2012, but it couldn't prevent informalities from appearing as indicate anteriority of documents to prove that their constructions existed before the decree's issue. And so there are several conditions and rules that must be satisfied in order to formalize an informal construction. As we mentioned, the proof of anteriority is a crucial rule that must be satisfied, as well as providing a report for the structural stability of the construction to verify its safety. The aesthetical quality must be verified, as well as a penalty tax that must be paid. Meanwhile, the informal settlements area can be formalized and settled after rehabilitating them, settling the existing property situation, and including them in the city's urban plan after paying the fees prescribed in the laws and regulations. So informal practices attempt to finish the construction as fast as possible in order to establish an existing state and fabricate a proof of anteriority. These practices, as a result, produce constructions of low quality that struggle to satisfy conditions of structural stability and aesthetical quality. On a larger scale, there are numerous urban planning efforts that attempted to study and organize the city's growth in different moments in the past 100 years, starting with Donger's master plan in 1936, Ecochard's master plan in 1968, and many others in the past 40 years. 40 years. However, the reality was always detached from what was planned. For example, EcoShart's plan that was supposed to finish in 1984 was at 65% completion in 2011. Followed in 1992, the city's National Institute of Urban Studies attempted to make a new study to be produced in 1994. But it was so late, it was already obsolete by the time it came out in 2004. In 2011, a Lebanese company was commissioned by the Syrian government to make a comprehensive urban study of Damascus and propose scenarios for its growth. But the study was never published and the project was completely cancelled. Meanwhile, the government proposed plans during the past 10 years, like Marota City Master Plan, that only existed, that was only oriented to treat large informal settlements and replace them with high-rise, luxurious residential towers, along with office districts and services. So in conclusion, all urban planning efforts were either unfinished works, late in their application, or badly implemented. Meanwhile, the city continues to grow regardless, to adapt and respond to the problems it faces. So we can conclude with these 4 points. First of all, that informal acts in Damascus are a natural reflection of needed development and growth. This growth mechanism is not alien to the city, as Damascus intramuros historically developed in an organic, similar way. We perceive double standards when addressing informalities in Damascus, where informal acts are being formalized in neighborhoods with higher living standards, while they are more likely to be demolished in poor neighborhoods, even though they are equivalent from a legislative point of view. Informal acts are becoming a built reality, and there should be a decrease to organize them before and not after their construction. And fourth, that the formal urban expansion outside the center of Damascus doesn't solve the pressing needs for housing and urban development, as all local urban planning efforts are completed years later, making them unfit to tackle pressing current issues today. Thank you.
Thank you for your listening.
Merci beaucoup. On va rester sur le même principe qu'on a énoncé pour Maroun précédemment. Donc, on débattra à la fin de la dernière présentation de Fabienne Louillot. Donc, Fabienne Louillot est architecte.
Thierry.
Oui.
Non, parce que Fabienne est dans
la deuxième session.
D'accord. Non.
Dans le planning.
Donc, on va avoir 10 minutes. On est à peu près bon, disons qu'à quelques 10 minutes près, ce qui n'est pas très grave. On va donc faire la discussion sur l'intervention de Maroun et celle de Majida et Osama. Et ensuite, on passera à la deuxième table ronde qui commencera non pas avec Fabienne, tu es d'accord Fabienne, mais avec Cyril. Voilà, Cyril est là. Donc il y a une inversion. Et là, on a, je te redonne la parole, Thierry. On a, vous m'entendez?
Oui, moi j'entends.
Ah d'accord. On a 10 minutes pour parler de très intéressante, à mon avis très complémentaire présentation entre et puis aussi des éléments de conclusion. Vous pouvez poser des questions, mais malheureusement on n'a pas beaucoup de temps et on peut aussi donc consacrer 10 minutes à poser des questions sur les deux présentations et ensuite reporter parce qu'on a du temps en fin de journée. J'espère que vous êtes tous libres en fin de journée. On a pas mal de temps en fin de journée pour faire une discussion plus large sur des questions plus générales regroupées des présentations. Voilà. Donc là, ce serait plutôt le moment des questions un peu spécifiques aux deux intervenants, enfin aux 3 intervenants.
Très bien.
Tu as une question, Thierry?
J'ai une question pour Maroun. C'est sur la question de l'espace public que vous construisez dans vos différents projets qui sont absolument magnifiques. Et donc, je connais l'aspect Beyrouth, mais je veux savoir est-ce qu'il y a une tradition de l'espace public où il est complètement absent ou inexistant, où il se résume à des grandes formes urbaines, à des grandes places. Par exemple, dans le dernier projet que vous présentez, il y a tout ce chapelet de petits espaces publics qui sont absolument magnifiques. Est-ce que c'est des choses qui existent à Beyrouth, on peut l'observer, ou c'est véritablement une proposition originale?
In principle, we have problem with the public spaces, I think, in Beirut City, and the appropriation for and that's why in this project we are negotiating in somehow really how to provide the activities of the private from the private actors that are now controlled the whole cities and the territory, how really through this architecture project could really provide to the right to the city to providing this public spaces and to integrate the private action with the public with the public spaces of the city. This is it is a very critical situation because really our even we have to understand. I think our public spaces sometimes they are related to spaces that are between buildings, to stairs. It's not really a public spaces for like Essai or like where we have this event. It's like, for example, in Karm Zaytoun, we create this kind after the analysis. We aim to create this kind of and to appropriate this some of the left areas, and we propose to the municipality to take this land and to become part of the public spaces of Karm Zaytoun. That's why the public space is it's very critical in our cities, and the notion of and the right and the respect of the public space is in somehow neglected. And I don't know if I answer your question.
Si, thank you. Il y a une question pour Majida. Alors, je n'ai pas accès à cette question.
Excuse-moi Thierry, je voulais...
Ah, pardon.
Non, je voulais juste une question très rapide à Maroun Dakash, étant donné qu'on a parlé de la question de l'espace public. Thank you very much for the presentation. I had a question about a particular project, which is Riverside. You mentioned this private project that is somehow suggesting to produce a new public space for an area that is deprived from these spaces. To what extent do you think that this project has succeeded, and how this space was appropriated? Because we know that in Beirut there were some ambitious projects before, like Sonat Architect, the campus of USG, that aimed to present this public space, but then later it has been enclosed and closed to the public. So
yeah, this is very critical situation, I think, in our Beirut city, especially if you look, for example, at all these interventions that we have, rise building in Marmkhayel and Jemmaisi area, especially in this area, you will see in the end the projects, especially at the ground floor level. I think the ground floor level to have an interpretation for public space to design the ground floor level, I think it's the most important issue in architecture. It's like the plans that generate, I think, ideas from the urban context, and this for me is very important issue. That's why, for example, in the intervention, private intervention in Beirut city, we can see in the ground floor is like a rejection of the city with the fence, and it's became like an island inside the urban fabric. And that's what I really did in Riverside. It's like, and this really the ground floor to be generated for the whole projects to communicate with the community, and we end in the end. Even if the owner wants to close the area, he cannot anymore, because the buildings, they are really three buildings, separate building, and you cannot close it anymore. That's why I think the integration of the ground floor is very crucial, I think, for the city in the end. It's like you are in the middle of the city, you have the portico, you have the shop, you have all this issue, and no one could control anymore, I think, this kind of spaces. That's why they are integrated in this sense, they are integrated in this.
Il y a deux questions. Pardon. Il y a une question pour Maroun qui est dans la conversation. Maroun, someone who is Rania Lalou, she asked how and why and the public space are paid by the city, or how do you manage to find money to build those public spaces?
Yeah, some projects, Rania, thank you for the question, but some projects we are proposing, like in Kermis Zaytun area, for example, we after our analysis, we propose for the municipality to really buy this land and to become like a part of the public activities of the community. We are projecting. It's like pilot projects that we propose for the municipality, but after that, I cannot control if the municipality in the end will really achieve this work or not. At private level, this is the I think, like private projects. We discuss a lot with the owner of the projects, and this really to give the right. To give through this project the right of the city, providing these public spaces for the community. So this is
now, thank you very much. Now there is a question from Feras Ataya, Majida et Osama. Can you speak, Feras?
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Merci. It was a very interesting presentation. My question is as follows. What measures can be taken to address the inevitable rise of informalities as refugees flock to the capital from war-torn areas?
Well, especially in war-torn areas, I mean, as we saw, like when the population increased exponentially, it was something that you can't anticipate necessarily. So informalities in that case will become a reality. But in the case of a war-torn country, or when a neighboring country is at war, the question is, how can we anticipate the people, the immigration, informal constructions? It's something that can't catch us by surprise. So we can anticipate this. And the question, especially in, for example, in areas like Damascus, is in a big part a legislative problem where there isn't any laws to accommodate or help people easily and facilitate their constructions. And so the majority of the population goes for informal acts and informal constructions to solve their problems. I don't think informalities is something that people do like just because they want to. It's because there's no easy way to construct a small room or find housing. And so it's, at least in my opinion, it's there need to be more laws to address this problem, and not only and not only find ways to punish it and make taxes and demolish it after it's happening, especially that it's been here for 40, 50 years at least. Yeah, more. So I don't know. I hope this answers the question.
Yeah, I just want to build on what you're saying. Sorry, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation, Majida and Osama. I have a question about the legal frame, because you mentioned some decrees that somehow are sanitary decrees a posteriori that somehow deal with what the informalities. But isn't there any legal framework for the transformation or the maintenance of the buildings, so especially the ones from the 1950s, 60s that you showed us? Or like in Lebanon, for instance, the changes were informal, and then progressively it shifted to what Jean-Pierre Frey called diversification. So is there any legal framework for enclosures or transformation in general, or additions?
I think there was, in a certain time, they were organized a bit, but after that, it was completely, it depended on creating the existing state and then deal with it. So it always was like that. Even the laws that came, they always dealt with all these informal acts in a way that is dealing with them after their existence. So no, there's no real legal law that deals with these needs before their existence. And this is why we are bringing up the subject, because it's always being generated like a chain. So this is where
Okay.
Thierry, tu veux conclure quelque chose?
Bien, non, juste une question peut-être aussi donc à Oussama. Dans ce que vous évoquiez sur les actes informels, donc sont une vraie réalité, elles construisent la ville, et vous évoquez donc la nécessité d'organiser des décrets, des règles, des principes pour organiser. Est-ce que vous avez, alors là c'est plutôt dans une dimension projet, est-ce que vous avez quelques pistes à énoncer peut-être pour diriger, contrôler, réglementer, mais
after observing this need for growth in all parts of Damascus and all its tissues, we can say, we can imagine that there is a need for this housing that adapts with time. So time is a crucial factor in Damascus. It's not something that we can deal with after. It's something that we should predict before. And this is why we are imagining that maybe we should develop something that is...
and especially that these informal constructions are presenting us with some interesting cases on an architectural level. For example, in our work here in Paris, we always talk about la réversibilité des bâtiments entre bureaux et logements dans le futur pour qu'on puisse les utiliser. Et du coup, quand on voit des cas, par exemple à Damas, où un bâtiment qui était complètement résidentiel et qui s'est transformé en un bâtiment de l'ordre des commerces, du coup, par exemple, ça c'est un argument pour le développement futur de la ville. Du coup, ça c'est en soi est intéressant. Il faut juste que ça devienne un procès formel dans la loi et qu'elle soit pas juste quelque chose fait sous la table, mais que tout le monde soit conscient que ça se fait comme ça.
Par rapport au logement ou par rapport à la question de l'habitat, est-ce que vous avez réfléchi pas?
Le problème que non, je connais pas des pistes et j'ai même peur que ça devienne même les vraies pistes vont en contresens parce que surtout aujourd'hui, comme le projet qu'on a montré à la fin de Marota City, surtout avec la guerre, il y a des projets qui deviennent avec les conditions même politiques, parfois sont des projets politiques, qui ont un aspect un peu politique. Parce qu'il y a une dimension pour dire que voilà, ces zones informelles sont des zones à démolir, à éradiquer. Du coup, on est en train de construire des bâtiments, des résidentiels, des quartiers de luxe qui ne correspondent absolument pas au niveau économique des gens. Du coup, honnêtement, non, je ne vois pas des pistes réelles aujourd'hui là-bas parce que de ce que je vois, c'est des... c'est presque surréaliste en fait les projets qui sont en train d'être proposés. Voilà, qui correspond pas, l'offre ne correspond pas du tout aux demandes là-bas actuellement, malheureusement.
Merci.
De rien.
Bien, on va peut-être passer à la table ronde suivante, sachant qu'on a du temps à la fin et que j'espère qu'on pourra reprendre ces éléments de discussion. Je vais donc passer à la question des pratiques contemporaines de conception dans la ville méditerranéenne qu'on a intitulée « Du commun à l'exceptionnel » pour montrer qu'il y avait en fait des pratiques très différentes dans leurs échelles, dans la manière qu'elles ont de solliciter des acteurs très différents. Et derrière ça, en parallèle, se pose toujours la question du rôle des architectes dans ces processus. Donc je vous signale par rapport aux